Magick's anger on the beat.
93, 93, 93. So I'm going to play with this instrumental just a little bit before we get started. So I'm just going to make sure that everything is working, make sure the sound is good. So just running a quick test before we go in. So give me 1 second here. Let's see what's going on. 93, Mary. Am I coming through clearly? So let me go ahead and test this sound out. I just want to make sure that we don't have any audio issues. So give me 1 second. All right, so the audio is good. Because the audio is good, we'll get straight to it. All right, so we go ahead and manipulate this beat and we'll get started. All right, it's good to go. All right, cool. Cool. Okay, so let me manipulate this beat and we'll get into it. All right, that should be good. All right, we back in here, so let's get right into it. So on this particular live stream, we're not going to be focused on a particular topic. I'm just going to flow and just be as natural as possible and not limit myself to any one thing. Let me turn this down just a tad bit. Okay. So first and foremost, it's about 3 a.m. in the desert. So it's about 6 a.m. East Coast. So probably a little bit before sunrise. So we are technically in a witching hour in the West Coast, where the energy is supposed to be the most spiritual, but let's find out. We'll see how everything flows out. So first and foremost, this is Sunday, July the 3rd. So we instantly can go to the numerology, which takes us to the 3rd degree. Now, the third degree can either take us to Jupiter, which is the planet of expansion, and we know Jupiter is the largest planet. We're also dealing with the energy of the sun because it is Sunday. So in terms of planetary frequencies, we're dealing with a combination of the sun and Jupiter. We can say the sun represents our individuality, our creativity. And we can say that Jupiter represents the law in terms of laws of the land, but it also represents universal laws, which we spoke about yesterday in depth. So the sun is bringing the self, because you can say the sun is the soul and the soul is the self. And because Jupiter represents expansion, what are we expanding? We are expanding the self. The self is different than the ego. You can say the self is the real you, your connection to the cosmic intelligence or the Godhead, whatever you would like to call it. So we have a combination of being able to expand your individuality, your creativity. So what does this mean for the day moving forward, or any day really? Because just as I explained yesterday, this is all mathematical equations that we experiment with in real time. So it's one thing, to know your sun sign as well as your Jupiter sign in this case. That could give you a little more insight as to how the sun manifests in your particular cipher and how Jupiter manifests in your particular cipher. However, if we are applying it to the world and looking at the world consciousness, now we have to look at things a little bit more detailed because it's going to be different than our personal alignments. So it's one thing to know our personal alignments, but it's another thing to know the transits, as they are called. Because when you're dealing with the transits, we know that the sun is in the season of Cancer, as tomorrow represents Independence Day. So Independence Day occurred in the season of Cancer. So right now the sun is in Cancer. Which means Jupiter is either in Aries. Now this depends on whether you're looking at things from a Western perspective or a Eastern perspective, of course. So let me be clear here. So right now, as I'm speaking, I'm dealing with the tropical alignments. So the tropical alignments place Jupiter in Aries currently. So the sun is in a water sign, a cardinal water sign, and Jupiter is in a cardinal fire. So we have the combination of a cardinal water sign and a cardinal fire sign. Whenever we're dealing with a cardinal energy, we are dealing with energy moving in one direction. Essentially, the energy is at full force. So we have a full force of fire and water, or wands and cups, if we take it to the tarot. 1 part wands, 1 part cups. The cups represents the creative plane or the creative world, while the fire represents the archetypal world. So one aspect of us is in the archetypal world, and another aspect of us is in the creative world. When it comes to the world of the archetypes, this is where we find our self, or our true self, or our true will. Because your true self or your true will be in alignment with your archetypal self, who you are beyond the ego. Then that archetypal self is given an expression, which is done in the creative world. So on this Sunday, July 3rd, what's occurring is giving creative expression to your archetypal self. This, you can say, would be the theme of today. So this represents a particular degree that can be pondered upon. As we know, there are 360 degrees in total, and each of these degrees have infinite ways to expand. They are not limited, they are rather infinite. So the infinite expression of these alignments is how we evolve and how we grow, which takes us back to the law of correspondence. The more correspondences we are able to be aware of, the more opportunities we have to evolve and see things from an alternative perspective. This is the whole goal of dealing with these things. You want to be able to see things differently. But in order to see things differently, we must exercise these tools that we have been given from the ancestors, those who have came before us and who have preserved this knowledge for us to pick it up in these times and free ourselves or liberate ourselves from any type of oppression or suppression we may be undergoing. So this will be the ultimate goal as to why you would do anything so-called spiritual. So you're not necessarily trying to raise your vibration, because that's a popular saying, you want to be vibing high. That's not necessarily the goal. Rather, you want to remain vibing evenly. You don't want to be vibing too high or too low. Because if you are vibing too high, it's hard to relate to people. Because it would be as if you're speaking an alien language amongst non-aliens, which reduces your effectiveness. This is what happens when a person fasts. If you, for example, did a 3-day fast, and then you went amongst the public, you will feel very out of touch with the public. Because you're going to see everybody engaging in their carnality, something that you don't really care for because you haven't been putting chemicals in your body. And because you haven't been putting chemicals in your body, you have no desire to do all the things that humans do. So the goal of fasting is to prove to yourself that your desires go beyond the physical plane. Because you're not going to know that until you remove yourself from the collective consciousness. You have to go into the collective unconscious, which is the dark and scary places of your consciousness that you try to suppress, that you don't want to deal with, but that are nonetheless a part of you and is not going anywhere because it must be integrated. Parts of us that we don't agree with or we don't like, they're not going anywhere, but we must nonetheless integrate with it. This is why it is a process. This is why it is a journey. The whole journey, or the purpose of the journey, is to integrate the aspects of yourself that you find uncomfortable. That when we see these attributes in other people, we don't necessarily like it. However, the reason we don't like it is because it's probably a part of us. It's just the part of us that we tend to not agree with. So if you are a quiet person, for example, and loud people irritate you, or if you are introverted and other people are different, are more, you can say, open and aware. Like, everybody doesn't feel charged or recharged communicating with people. That's an extrovert, if I'm saying that correctly. Those type of people are recharged by being amongst people, being in atmospheres where there is many different people. However, if you are an introvert, you recharge essentially in isolation when you remove yourself from the collective conscious. So we must understand what motivates us and also what depletes our energy so that we know how to remain balanced. So I'm saying these things to say there are many aspects of us that we simply don't like or agree with. Because when we see other people displaying those attributes and it makes us feel some type of way, that's how you know it's more personal than you realize. Just look at the people that irritate you, the people that you so-called don't like, and you look at the reasons as to why you don't like these people. A lot of times is due to their attributes that you may not find pleasant. But those same attributes that we may not find pleasant within others is also within us. It may not be a part of our ego because the ego is self-created. So your ego tells you, you can say, I'm this and not that. However, if we are dealing with the self is all containing. It contains all things, all dimensions of your consciousness, the good, the bad, and the ugly, as one. And this is why I don't want people to get confused when we speak about terms like enlightenment. Being enlightened doesn't mean that you're just all positive and you have destroyed your ego and that's something that you no longer have to deal with. The ego is always present. There's no way to destroy your ego completely in this physical world. We can put the ego to sleep. We can push it to the side. But you're never really going to destroy your ego. You can reinvent it. but it's not going to be destroyed. What's up, Oshun? So the ego is always in transmutation. That's why we have the ego as well as the alter ego. It is the alter ego that houses all the aspects of you that you don't agree with, that you don't like, but they are nonetheless a part of you. So this is why it is important to study your dreams, to study your unconscious mind, because you are simply studying the wholeness or the fullness of yourself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is what true enlightenment means. You have come into full acceptance of who and what you are in totality. So again, you don't become this sacred being free of sin. You actually just become comfortable with your sins. And you realize this is just a part of me. This is a part of my evolution. For me to come into the realization of who or what I am, I must sin. I must engage in positive things as well as negative things, because that's what keeps us balanced. So the goal is balance. The goal is not to be positive or negative. You should not identify with anybody who considers themselves positive or negative, because they both are imbalanced. A positive person is no better than a negative person, because they both are ignoring their opposites. The negative person is ignoring that they're actually positive, and the positive person is ignoring that they're actually negative as well. But the ego tricks us and makes us believe we're one or the other. So once we are able to go beyond this illusion of positive or negative, and we accept the wholeness of who and what we are, this is the closest form of enlightenment that you can really experience. This is why we cannot get it confused. The teachings of the East are not meant for us here in the West. In other words, we're not going to be able to do what they did in Tibet, what they did in India, and come to the same conclusions. We're not going to create monasteries and temples and places of worship where you can just go and be a monk or be a recluse. That culture is simply not possible over here in the West. So we study the East, the Eastern sciences, but we don't study these things to become like them. We must study these things to become like us. This is what it means to be original. So anybody you see walking around like a monk, or walking around looking like or sounding like they're from the East, or doing things that are Eastern here in the West, you know that that is not the final form of enlightenment. That's actually not enlightenment at all, because we are here to create something original. We're not here to mimic anyone or anything or any culture, because it is a reason why the East has the knowledge that they have. There's a reason why we have the knowledge we have over here in the West. That's why it is a difference between Eastern occultism and Western occultism. If you want the truth, people are more willing to dig into Eastern occultism because they don't really be talking about the devil. and black magic and all these things that everybody gets spooked out about. So it's easier for people to accept meditation, to accept the Hindu gods and goddesses. It's easier for people to accept these things because it's not really that challenging. It doesn't really challenge you. What challenges us is Western occultism. That's when we begin to learn about things like the devil, Lucifer, Baphomet, Thelema, Aleister Crowley, Helena Blavatsky, so on and so forth. All of the people that everybody's so afraid of, but they have never read the literature. People are even afraid to read the book of the law, let alone in any other literature here that deals with Western occultism. So this is a real reason why people prefer the Eastern knowledge, because it doesn't challenge you, and it's not supposed to challenge you because it was created in the East. What challenges you is when you accept your Western self. When you accept the fact that you are more than whatever they're trying to push on you. Whatever, okay, you're a new ager, you're into metaphysics, or the occult, spirit science, whatever you want to call it. You must realize that we go beyond all that. None of those things are the final answer. If you are not dealing with the negative side, which is the Western occultism, you can say the negative is the feminine. So the feminine aspect of the occult is the Western occultism, which you can say, which is where you learn about the devil. In the East, you learn about God. You learn about the godhood. You learn about nirvana. You learn about no thought. You learn about karma. So you see, these are the type of things that's on everybody's mouth. They speak in this new age lingo because it's easy to accept. What's challenging about sitting on your ass and meditating? You may have a hard time slowing down your thoughts, but it doesn't necessarily challenge you to face your darkness, because you're trying to, you can say, multiply your light. That's why it's all about love and light, which is bullshit, because that is not the wholeness of reality. That is a piece of it. That's not the entire picture. Because as you see, these people or this philosophy is not complete. It is only 50%. We're only dealing with the masculine or the positive nature of a thing. We're not dealing with the negative nature of a thing. So this is why you see so many people incomplete all over the place, barely even making sense when it comes to this knowledge, because it can drive you to madness. And this is what we have been observing. We have been observing people driven to madness because they are not complete. They are overly positive. That's what's going on. They're just ODing on positivity, thinking that they're doing something righteous, and all they're doing is creating more imbalance within themselves because they haven't accepted the fullness. So that's why all these, again, so-called new agers, they can be all about any of this knowledge, but they still have fear of the devil. They still fear Lucifer. They still don't want to touch anything considered black magic. They don't want anything to do with it. Not because it's wrong, not because it's evil, not because it's bad, because that's all relative. You can use positive energy for wrong intentions as well, but you don't really hear too many people talking about that, but we know this to be true. You can shield your intentions with positive acts. That's very possible. So just because we see people doing positive things or being positive, we understand that, okay, this is a creation. This is not reality. This is a fabrication. This is not fullness. when a person or people only want us to know about the godly attributes, but never mention the devilish attributes, which is within all of us. There's not a single person on this planet who don't have devilish attributes or godly attributes. But you must acknowledge, again, it's easier to acknowledge the God within you before you acknowledge the devil within you. It's easier to accept the light within you than accepting the darkness within you. That's a journey. That's a process. That's something that you have to come to the understanding of over time. This is not something that we just automatically understand overnight. This is what challenges us. This is what will have you in situations where you feel like, damn, maybe I didn't make the right decision. When you are exploring your darkness. Because it's going to take you to places that you like, oh, how the fuck did I end up here? That's just how deep your darkness goes. You can get lost. Some people don't make it back to the light. They find comfort in the dark, just like some people find comfort in the light. Never exploring the dark. They actually are avoiding it. That's how you know it's not balanced. If somebody is going out of their way to avoid negativity or to be extra positive, you know that that is not balanced. That's not natural. Now we're going beyond reality, which is not our purpose. We are supposed to go deeper into reality, but that requires a Western occultic mindset to go deeper into reality. Everybody wants to escape. You know, everybody wants to pretend like we're in a world that will eventually, you know, be peaceful. World peace or world hunger will be solved. We're going to be, you know, civilized human beings to each other. That's not going to happen no time soon. No time soon. So once we begin to look at things from a realist perspective, meaning we didn't necessarily come here to make the world a better place. You came here to understand your own consciousness, because consciousness is the only reality anyway. So the so-called world that we're supposed to be trying to fix is literally our own consciousness. As we go back to the universal laws, the first law is a law of mentalism. Everything is mental. If everything is mental, that means the only thing that exists is your consciousness. So whatever you're trying to fix in the world must be fixed from your consciousness. This is how we heal the world. By healing our own consciousness, by accepting the fullness of who and what we are. Not being overly positive and not avoiding negativity or trying not to be negative, because that's just a feminine principle, which is absolutely necessary. It is necessary to tap into your feminine currency, just like it is necessary to tap into your masculine currency. You need both. They need to be equal. This is why we see people fighting for these things in real time. What they're really fighting is their own consciousness. The reason why we feel like there is not equality in the world is because we are not equal in our mentality, in our own consciousness. That's where the imbalance is taking place, within our own consciousness. So what we see as the madness of the world, the mental illness of the world, that's why it's called a mental illness. That's why it's called mental health. That means this is your consciousness. So it really has nothing to do with nobody else, no other situation, no other person, place, or thing. It is strictly about your consciousness. Do you have an understanding of what it means to be conscious? See, everybody knows what it means to be woke. But being woke is different than being intelligent. Just because you are awake doesn't mean that you are aware of what actually is occurring. Most people are not aware. Even if they are woke, they're still not aware of all the contents within their own consciousness. That's what it means to be enlightened. You know 100% of who and what you are, the good, bad, and ugly. That's what it means to be enlightened. I know myself in and out. Not that you have, you can say, released all negativity from your system, because that's just simply not possible. So this is why, this is the last thing people are trying to do. That's why it takes somebody like me to talk about it. This would be spoken about all over the place if it was mainstream, if people were just willing to do it. But clearly people are not willing to do it. So that's why I speak about all the things that people are not willing to do. And it all comes down to they are not ready to accept the fullness of their consciousness. The contents of their consciousness scares them. How do you know the contents of their own consciousness scares them? Because they're still afraid of anything associated with anything evil, negative, or black. Which is within all of us. We all come from carbon. We all come from stardust. Every man and every woman is a star. It tells you that as soon as you open up the book of the law, Chapter 1. Every man, every woman is a star. We know this already. We spoke about the 5 points yesterday. The arm, the 2 legs, and the head. The 2 arms, the 2 legs, and the head. Arm, leg, arm, head, Allah. We already spoke about that, so we know this. But this is why it is the 5 points. Because once you reverse that pentagram, because if we're talking about the 5 points, the 5 points creates a pentagram. And when you reverse that pentagram or invert that pentagram, now it turns into a inverted pentagram, which we know is a symbol of, you can say, Satanism. When you invert that pentagram, meaning your own consciousness to be able to absorb negative forces or invisible forces, the feminine currency, that is the equivalent to inverting the pentagram. Because when you invert the pentagram, now instead of pushing your energy outward towards some type of spirit or some type of God, you instead begin to absorb energy. Feminine or negative energy instead of pushing out positive energy, which is what most people are doing. They're constantly pushing out positive energy, which is fine if it's balanced with negative. That's why the pentagram can be inverted. It's supposed to be inverted. You're supposed to be projecting and absorbing, projecting the masculine and absorbing the feminine. That's what creates balance. And again, that's why we are the 5 points. We are the star. We must master the upward motion as well as the inverted motion, because that's how we become balanced. Which is very scary, because you see, you got to actually meet the devil. That's why I have spoken about these things throughout my time on YouTube. I spoke more about the dark in my earlier years. Then I began to speak more about the light. But if you go back and do the history, you have seen I have always been speaking about both sides. Just to make it absolutely clear that this is the process. Full acceptance of yourself. And this is why we don't see this too much on other people's channels or whatever content, because they're trying to put their best foot forward. They're not trying to show you themselves in their worst state, because they're still dealing from the ego. When you're dealing from the ego, you always want to put your best foot forward. So you're only going to show the world what you want the world to know about you. You're only going to let them see what you want them to see. It's highly regulated. It basically becomes just like politics. Once you go beyond the politics, once you go beyond the scams, once you come to the realization that enlightenment is not having an Eastern mind, it is having a Western mind with hints of the East. Meaning it is absolutely necessary to study the East, but it ain't for you to become it. So that's why I'm pointing this out. Do not be one of these people who studies the East and now that's all they're about, to the point where they don't even acknowledge anything Western. Meaning you're not acknowledging no voodoo spirits. You're not acknowledging any native spirits, Native American spirits. You're just all about, Lakshmi, Shiva, Shakti, Ganesh. Or you're all about the African spirits, the Oshuns, the Shangos or Shangos, the Obatalas. Remember, all this is happening on the Eastern Hemisphere. So when I say the East, I'm speaking about the Eastern Hemisphere. So I'm not just speaking about India. It's the whole Eastern Hemisphere. So that includes Europe. That includes Africa. That includes everything over there towards the East. And that's why I say it's easier for us to accept those Eastern teachings than it is to accept the Western teachings. Again, which is why we don't see an abundance of people practicing voodoo or hoodoo. Again, or Thelema. Anything that started over here. Not necessarily that it started over here, but it makes sense in terms of it manifested the so-called devil frequency or the so-called frequency of the Baphomet. They wasn't really talking about that in the East. Or that wasn't the emphasis. You're not going to really find them speaking about a Baphomet. And Buddha didn't believe in a God. So you're not going to learn anything about God from Buddha, from Buddhism, which is the first world religion. Because Buddha wasn't speaking about a God. Buddha only spoke about karma and consciousness, because according to the Buddha, that's the only thing that exists. It is your karma and it is your consciousness. So this whole idea of God and devil, you can say, came with the Western. Not that the Western created the God and the devil, but we placed an emphasis on it. In other words, we have placed an emphasis on you need to negate the devil or you need to outwit the devil. We didn't heard all type of books about that, right? So there's a whole book called Outwitting the Devil. It's just we're supposed to be in this supreme war over these so-called dark forces that has this agenda to take over the world, and this, the demiurge. If we go to the Gnostic texts, we associate the devil with the demiurge. The demiurge is the creator of this world that made this world a flawed world. That's why we need to exercise both realities, the masculine and the feminine, because we exist in a flawed world. This is not a perfect world. This world is charged with a positive current and a negative current. That means parts of this world is good, other parts is bad. But again, that takes us right back to the universal laws, the laws of polarity, as well as the law of cause and effect, or the law of causality. All this lets us know that nothing is fully negative or fully positive. It is a combination of them both. So that includes the contents of your consciousness. Remember, the 7 universal laws is what let us know that all these things are real. So that's how we know that consciousness is dual nature. It is dual nature, meaning it is one part positive, one part negative. So if we try to remove the positive, or if we try to remove the negative, we're only doing ourselves an injustice. So this is why the mainstream is going to push you towards the positive, the angelic. It's going to push you towards God. It's going to push you towards Jesus, Christianity. Anything that puts you in a position where you're fighting the so-called devil, or the so-called negativity, or the so-called negative current, or feminine current. Somehow we're placed in a situation where we're against the feminine current. Then we wonder why things like Roe versus Wade occurs. Why there's so much oppression for women. We wonder why this is. Well, look at our consciousness. Look at what we're doing. We forever exalt the positive currents, then say fuck the negative currents, because they're supposed to be bad and devilish. So if you are a person that believes that the only reason why this world has sin is because Eve spoke to that serpent, there's some people that really believe that, like the reason why this world is negative is because of Eve's actions and the story in the Bible and other books. But you see, once we dig into the occultism, this actually lets us know that's how the world became balanced. Eve actually balanced the world instead of causing the world to be imbalanced. Meaning the Garden of Eden was not balanced. It was, you can say, purely positive. The Garden of Eden was purely positive. Which is what most people, the idea of heaven for most people is. It's just purely positive, no negative currents. But we see that's not a reality. That's why you had a serpent creeping into the Garden of Eden to cause a balance. Because there can be no balance in something that is strictly positive. So that negativity had to come from the serpent, and then they were cast out into the world, and the world contains a positive and a negative current instead of it being fully positive. So they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden to master their polarity, because now they have to operate not strictly from the positive, but they also must incorporate the negative. And the negative is dualistic because there's two negative. You have Eve, but you also have Lilith. You have the first wife of Adam and you have the second wife of Adam. So Lilith went on to become the queen of demons, or access the Klipofic plane, and Eve accessed the Kabbalah, which is the plane of light, or the tree of life. So Eve became the queen of the tree of life, while Lilith became the queen of death. This is another reason why I say we must master the tree of life as well as the tree of death. The Notoria as well as the Goetia, the angels as well as the demons. That is the 144,000 spoken about. 72 angels, 72 demons. 72 plus 72 gives you 144. So that 144,000, half of that is angelic, half of that is demonic. So if it's supposed to be 144,000 people that are saved, supposedly, those are the people that will make it to the new earth, the new reality. Well, that means Half of those people will be positive, half of those people will be negative. That's just the nature of the atom. As we spoke about yesterday, that is just simply the nature of the atom. This is why it's 72 positive charge, 72 negative charge. That creates the new world or the new earth, the new reality. It takes a positive and negative charge. You see, it all comes down, or back to the universal laws. That's how we know whether something is true or false. So that is essentially my message for the morning. Do your absolute best to maintain supreme balance within, especially during these times where we're being pushed to be more positive. With the feminine currency is being suppressed. It's not going to be successful, but they're going to at least try. Of course, the feminine is more powerful than the masculine, or the magnetism is more powerful than the frequency. The vibration is more powerful than the frequency. So we know that the feminine is more powerful, but they're still going to try to make us believe that we don't need that negative charge. The only thing that matters is a positive charge. The only thing that matters is a masculine charge. As long as we don't fall for that, we'd be good to go. As long as you continue to dig into the depths of your consciousness and discover not only your positive attributes, but also your negative attributes, you're going to be way better off than somebody who's trying to rid themselves of their negative attributes and then call themselves enlightened because they are pretending that they're no longer negative. It's just an act. That's the whole reason why I'm speaking about this. Anybody who's walking around thinking that they are no longer negative because they've been meditating and they reach some type of nirvanic state is simply, I don't want to be that harsh calling the people a fraud, but it's misinformation. It's not real. That's not realistic. That is not a realistic aim for you to have no negative charge. That's just simply not a realistic aim. So do not waste your time trying to mimic Eastern cultures. Realize that it is a gift to be here in the West in these times in the 21st century and utilize it to your advantage. We have access to all this knowledge. And again, the Eastern knowledge is, is very tempting to, because we have access to all this knowledge that is different than the reality in which we live on a day-to-day basis. So this is why it's interesting to a lot of people, because it's absolutely different than what we have to deal with on a daily basis. But in order to fully understand why we must deal with what we deal with on a daily basis, we must respect the land that we are on. We must respect the Western Hemisphere. We must respect the Western cultures. That's why I mentioned voodoo. That's why I mentioned hoodoo. And of course, hip hop, which is the universal culture. But I speak about hip hop so much, I really don't need to mention it. But that's essentially the goal, because hip hop embraces the negative and positive. You can say hip hop, you listen to any hip hop song on the radio, it's probably negative. It's probably talking about killing somebody. It's probably talking about fucking your bitch. So we have that negative current, but that actually is what makes it divine, because it is positive and negative. So even though the words may be negative, you can say it makes you feel good. It makes people want to get up and dance. It motivates your animal soul. It makes you want to get up and hustle and grind. So even though it's speaking about negative things, it doesn't make you feel negative. You're not listening to these songs and you feel worse about yourself. It actually, listen to these songs actually may make you get up out your seat and feel a lot better about yourself. It may motivate you to get up and go to the gym, get a workout on, go to the park, get some exercise in. Get some jogging in. It may motivate you to be active, to get some exercise in, which is what it's supposed to do. Hit the treadmill. Lift some weights. Practice some calisthenics. If you don't have any equipment, just go to the park. Do some pull-ups. Do some push-ups. While you're listening to this so-called demonic music or devilish music, versus try to do all these things while you're listening to classical music or you're listening to Eastern music. Put some Eastern music on when you hit the gym, or put some classical music, but classical is like Western. Put some Eastern music on and see if it hits the same. So we understand sometimes that negative currency is what motivates you to move beyond whatever state you're in into a different state of consciousness. Sometimes we need a force of chaos, which destroys or collapses the particles into waveforms so that they can be reassembled and reorganized and create something different. So with that, I bear peace. Take this message and utilize it to the best of your ability. We'll speak soon. 93, 93, 93.